I have said this. All right, cool. We finally
We're
live, yeah.
going. We're going.
But yeah, so I
Yuri,
don't think,
Yuri Semenikin.
yeah. But
Правильно?
if,
Correct?
yeah, well,
Welcome.
thank
Good to
you.
have you
I
back
think,
on. We chatted about doing this um, recently. There's obviously turmoil in the world exacerbated by the Trump admin, and Ukrainians keep fighting on. Actually, wanted to show you something really quick here as I start. But anyway, how you doing?
I'm all right. I do have some interesting news of my own. I've actually just yesterday spoke to a PhD student from one of the, is it Finland universities? And basically, if you can see behind me that what looks like a metal cage, it's actually one of
Mm-hmm.
my projects. I'm trying to build a four-wheel bicycle. And now one of the other projects we had to do with green energy. And basically, while I was doing some research and like contacting people on the subject, I got given his details, and he's actually worked like on essentially the same idea, but because unlike me, he was actually smart and stayed in university, they help him to develop it. So we're looking forward to bringing out a new energy storage slash production solution in the near future. So we are looking forward to finding some investors.
Mm, okay. Maybe we can get some Bitcoin investors for you.
Uh,
Is this going to have any implications for the front in Ukraine?
if you can imagine cutting the need of oil by half for energy, like for production. So at the moment, a lot of electricity is produced through oil and gas, burning oil or gas, like
Mm-hmm.
mostly gas, then coal, then a bit of oil, then nuclear, and then green. And the problem of the green energy is the fact that when it produces the most, we're actually not using even half of it. So if you know, like California, or was it Texas in US, definitely the two states when the solar at the hottest dates, the solar goes into the cost of electricity goes into actually minus. So that because the solar produces so much electricity and they don't have anywhere to store it, so essentially they end up dumping it into the ground. In Well, with wind turbines, often happens the same when the wind picks up. So it produces so much electricity that the whole system doesn't have the capacity to take it all in,
Are
and
they
they
buying
end up
Bitcoin now with that?
no, they don't. They don't have the wires to transfer that, and it's like it's kind of a temporary jump. So let's say it might have be a jump of like 20 minutes to half an hour. Yeah, when you have a really strong wind,
Mm-hmm.
and then it switches off. So the system just doesn't manage to balance itself. So a lot of times the electricity, that extra electricity, goes actually into the ground. So they just throw it away. And to store it, you need obviously very, very, very big battery, kind of lithium or something like this. But this is not something, I mean, we're talking gigawatts of power, and we're talking like, storing it and using it, discharging it. And the batteries, they really die fast, for the price they are. It's okay if you run like a few megawatts for a small town, and maybe you update the batteries once every 10 years, maybe. But for this kind of levels of energy, you really need something that can last. And essentially, the solution we both came up with allows for that. It basically does not require any rare earth materials. So it's kind of based on essentially like very different physics than the normal batteries do. So it's all about like storing the energy as heat and transferences and things like this. So, and it can be easily turned from like a storing a few megawatts to storing a few gigawatts.
Hmm.
So the solution is kind of very, very simple. And both of us, we were like talking and we were like, we don't understand why anybody has not done it before us. But there's a few issues with it, like, which you need to really think out of the box to solve those issues. And we both had like essentially the same idea about the same time. At some point of time, I was actually like, okay, cool, I don't mind. I actually made a video, very bad video with a very bad design, which I worked on after that. But then I spoke to people and they said, look, why don't you just, if people not interested in making it, why don't you make it yourself? So I took the video off and I was looking for people to work with, and this is how I met this guy. And basically, he ended up already completing the basic prototype, that proof of concept prototype. So it was part of his PhD thesis, and the university helped him do this. So he was like, but his prototype was like, it was a funny story because we were talking with him and he was like, yeah, because our engineers in the university that were helping him, they really wanted to make everything perfect. So the prototype ended up costing like 100,000 euros. And I was saying like, well, if somebody helped me, I could have built a prototype for like about 5 to 6 grand. He was like, really? I was like, yeah, I just would not bother making it like perfect. It just needs to work. But because obviously it was part of his PhD and they really researched into like certain subjects, which how to put it, when you do an original prototype, like proof of concept prototype, you might not look into these subjects. But because it was such a big thing for what he was doing, they actually looked into a few things, and he said some of the stuff that they worked out when they were building the first prototypes. He said like, I know more about certain parts of like physics and energy storage which I never knew even existed. So yeah, but at the moment we're like in the process of like sitting down, drawing up some like paperwork so that we know what we're looking for, so that we, as a startup, we want to register a startup, so that we know that we have a clear direction in which we're going. So we're not like, how many startups come in, they come up with this really great idea, but then they have no idea where they're going. So they have all the knowledge, they come in, we know all this, we know all that, and then they have like, you start speaking to them, it's like, okay, what's your direction? What is it that you want to achieve? And say, oh, we want to save the world. It's like, oh, it's a great idea to save the world. Like, what's your first 5 steps? You know, and people generally fail on that, which actually quite often makes me laugh, because how people like who don't really understand much of economics, and they say planned economy doesn't work. And it always makes me laugh having those conversations with people, because when you start a business, the first thing you do is you sit down and you write a business plan. So like how you plan to get things done. So I was like this is always made me very interested. It's like, yeah, like planned economy doesn't work. But if I want to start a company, the first thing I write is a business plan. So what the
Well,
stage we're in
it
is,
means a centralized plan, like a planning board, like a Friedrich Hayek used to say. A centralized planned economy is, like a Soviet style economy or a Chinese economy. They have these 5-year plans, 10-year plans, but they never work.
I tend to disagree with that, because we elect presidents, we elect parliaments, and they come with 5-year plans. 5 to 10 year plans as well. The difference is that what many people don't understand is Chinese economy and Soviet economy. Uh, Once you start creating a system where essentially lying within a system doesn't get you in trouble, that's when you don't have a feedback and you cannot change your plans because you have a dictatorship. Like Soviet Union was technically a dictatorship, until all the way till the end. This is what really got them is, and within that dictatorship, like what happens is right now we have a dictatorship in the West. We have a variation on the dictatorship of capitalism, right? And this is what happens is you have a party or you have like a group of people at the top which basically get moved up no matter what. So no matter what their errors are, like no matter what happens, they get into the place. We talked to you about this last time, when we were saying like, hey, we have this bunch of really, really old people who have not got there by actually getting things done, but providing by being yes people and providing all sorts of various services which had nothing to do with keeping the economy running. So, and that's what happens in these big economies is like people start lying. I mean, just an example from USSR actually. So they had many women in USSR were complaining about how it was very seldom that the Soviet factories made good shoes. And it was a real life situation in Kherson, where I'm from. We had a shoe factory, and it was a friend of our families was working there, and they've actually designed. They said we designed a very good shoe, but what happened was that the guy who was because the shoe they had to get certain parts of the shoe from other manufacturers, and one of the parts that the manufacturer was like that heel or something like this, and they had certain heel which was in the design. It was like heel number 4. But when the manufacturer came to delivering something, they've delivered like a different model. So like number 3. Like this, obviously, they have a catalog which they used, and they said, "Well, this is the wrong one." And the other guy, but because the guy was a party member, and the factory had that was making shoes was a party member. Essentially, the idea was that, well, we cannot really fail. We have to take those heel number 3s, right? And this is where like, and we just tell to everyone that everything is fine. But in the end of the day, like, because they took heel number 3, which is almost the same as the one that's number 4, but it's like off by like 5 millimeters, and then they do something else. And so the shoe looks almost the same as the one which they designed, only it's very uncomfortable, horrible to wear. And when women were putting them on, they started to look like hell. And that's the problem. This is a similar problem we have now. It's like where there's no feedback from the bottom to the top. I think I
Well,
was like, I
in the
was,
market there is. That's what the price. That's why you need a price system. Because if you Soviet Union didn't have, they were more quotas for a lot of the commanding heights of the economy, but
yeah,
they
but
were indirectly using the price system of the West with some of the commodities. But yeah, that's what you need. You need a,
yeah,
that's like China. China has a planned economy, but they still indirectly use the price system of the West for
yeah, but
their
if
main
you don't have
resources.
the feedback, like so,
Yeah.
so I generally find that like if you want to build communism, there's two things you need, right? Well, two major things you need, which neither
Hold on.
Soviet
Do you want to
Union.
build communism?
Yeah, I do, because I told you can call me a communist, right?
I didn't know that
So
about you.
don't call me a Bolshevik and don't call me the modern left because
Mm.
I don't like either of the parties. But
Okay.
I generally say, look, if we want to build communism, right, there's two major things we need to start from. Number one is democracy. Like, because the idea of the communism, even if you read Marx, was the fact that, yeah, people actually become politically active. They select people who represent them and things like that. So that's part of that. Like whenever you talk about communism in any form outside of Bolsheviks and Chinese party, it is all about like, yeah, people get to elect their leaders from the bottom to the top. So you do need an active and functioning democracy. And another thing you need is an active and functioning market. So where the market is where people like, I think Jordan Peterson puts it like where he talks about hierarchy of competence. Like, we without the hierarchy of competence, an open hierarchy of competence, not, oh, because you're part of the party you get to get promoted, but this guy who actually does the job, but he's never spent time to be a party member, doesn't. So it's like, I mean, one of the things, like, when the Soviet Union was just beginning, and it's only disappeared after Stalin's death, like surprisingly, but during Stalin's time, yes, there were lots of bad things happening, but one of the good things was that if somebody was good at what their job did, right, if they have not been arrested and put to jail, the other path was that, like, if they were good at, somebody would come in and say, ah, you're very good. We want you to go up the ranks, yes, but we also you want you to represent the party. So they would recruit into the party from the successful people rather than making the party members promoted. That was a very different approach, which really changed in the end of 1950s and start of 1960s. So, but that's what, like, you need that hierarchy of competence. What was it they were saying, from everyone by their ability. And unless you can build those two systems in, you cannot build any form of communism whatsoever. It's just going to be a dictatorship under the guise of communism. So this is what I'm saying. It is like very last time we were talking about this, like saying that, hey, the Soviet Union, we have to look at. We cannot just ignore it, and we have to understand what was wrong, what was right. People prefer, like I say, it's like either all like unicorns and rainbows, or like monsters and bloodshed. There's no in the middle. But there is, like, saying like, yes, it was never, it was failing. Like one of the biggest reasons it failed is that about 1960s, 1970s, like, people were started to say like, hey, wait a minute, we have dealt with all the problems and we want more influence. But the party, this is when the idea of like, well, we have not reached communism yet. We have only built like a base form of socialism, and the party needs to be in charge for 100 years longer, appeared. And this is when the Soviet Union really started to fail in the social view. I mean,
Do you think there's anybody in Ukraine that wants to go back to the Soviet Union?
there was for a while, especially older generation, there was a
Yeah.
lot of people in the older generation, and the
Same in
reason was
same in the Baltics.
was was that, like, for example, you never had unemployment benefit in Soviet Union, but you were always guaranteed a job. So you could always come into the job office and say, hey, I lost my job, or like I had to leave my job because of for whichever reasons, and now I want to go back to work. And you would be given like, it will not be a perfect job that you want, but it will be a job. Now, then there was a certain market of achievement in Soviet Union. So if you studied in school well, and then you went to university well, you could actually go from the, like, small little town, you could go and raise yourself all the way to like either a very big central city in a very nice job, or you could even go up to the capital cities. So that existed. Not many people took advantage of the system, but that existed, right? So some of my mother's memories were like, look, because of, obviously, again, I'm always saying when I'm talking about USSR, I'm talking about the USSR that I have reasonable information about, like maybe some memories, maybe the stuff that my parents and my aunts and uncles have told me, which is the USSR of 1980s. And I actually made a video about talking about my all the part of the USSR. So it's like there was this security for the kind of people who are not hyperachievers. But if you worked hard and if you worked within the system, yes, you could not build a political career, but you could build a very comfortable life. The people who are unhappy with the Soviet Union are often, well, to be honest, many of them would be construed as the modern left a lot of times, but also people who are very kind of like out there, like who are either hyperachievers or who want to explore the rest of their potential. This is where Soviet Union has failed. It's like if you bring up Maslow pyramid, right, and you look at the lower three levels, I think like your basic health, your basic like food and shelter, basic clothing. Like this is like where the communism generally sits. And the problem is if you wanted to get out from this, like, there's a funny story. There's a very well-known poet. I don't remember his name. Just recently heard about this story where he was a very well-known. He became a very well-known poet, but by trade he was a mechanic or something like this, and then the mechanical engineer. And when he wanted to publish his first book of poetry, he was told by a guy in the Central Committee who has never written any poetry whatsoever. And I actually used that example in the video I was making, where it's like if you want to publish a book, because you just feel like writing something and you want people to read it, right? There would be some guy sitting there and telling to you, but you know, either this book is not good for whatever reasons that he doesn't like it, or he would say, "Oh, did you have any training as a writer?" Or there's like the guy could not, so this poet could not publish his first poetry books literally because he would be refused because he never had an education as a poet. So this is a system which is like how they say this is a dictatorship where the empowerment comes from the top, but there's no feedback from the bottom. And without that, you cannot build communism. I'm sorry, guys. It's just like
Well, I
it's
can assure you, no one
ridiculous.
on this channel wants to build communism.
Actually, if you listen to what many people say, right, maybe they call it different names, right? But I'm generally saying, like, look, the ideas what things what many people work like a security of employment, like where you can find jobs and things like this, having having to be paid fairly, right? So this is like what was the Trump talking about when he was getting elected? He was saying, hey, I'm going to bring jobs back. Hey, you're going to get paid fairly. Hey, you're going to be afforded a house. You will be able to afford a house, a flat. Hey, you will be able to take care about your family. Most basic things, like I said, we want that basic things. But as long as we don't pretend that communism is anything but the basic things and start creating it into the, like I said, a dictatorship that we had before, if we don't have the democracy, if we don't build the democracy, if we don't build the open market, you know, it's not going to work. So I want a democracy, I want an open market, I want people to have fair paid jobs. I want people to be able to take care about their families. Is that if this is wrong, then people please sue me.
I
I
think it's a
think we're
question
all
of
in.
scale too, because as Thomas Sowell said, and Walter Williams, and some of these free market economists, when you're talking about your local level, your family level, people are usually quite socialist. Uh, Things are not really done on a profit and loss basis. You're doing things on uh, routine and hard work. There is some lending going on because sometimes children can deal with one another that, okay, I'll do the chores today, you do the chores tomorrow. So there is always some dealing, usually some credit. So there is a little bit of market behavior going on, but it's not a rigorous market behavior. And then as you go up the ladder, to beyond the community, then you go to the state level or the regional level, the oblast level, and then you go to the national level. Um, if you keep that communist regime in place, then you'll usually get that dictatorship. So you don't want that.
This is why I said you need a very strong democratic basis. You cannot build because as soon as you like my thought is like this: as soon as you start becoming a dictatorship, then you stop building communism, right? So this is one thing. Number two, quite often, where many of those people who talk about open market, like Thomas Sowell and many others, they mean well, but quite often they go like, well, what if you when you ask them, what if majority wants to do that? So majority wants to have this, and straight away they start backpedaling and like Thomas Sowell was a scientist, so like it's very hard to argue with him because I agree with most of the stuff he's saying, but the problem starts is like when you say, well, what if majority wants this? You know, we as a majority, as a democracy, we decide this. And straight away they go like, no, no, no. If it doesn't fit my idea of what you want, then you're a dictatorship.
Well, that's why most people like to go to the anarcho capitalist route where they, because you can have a tyranny of the majority. And if you have a tyranny of the majority, that often leads to issues. Um, we're seeing that socially right now, for example, in the U.S. Um, but I don't think it's a such a novel problem that we haven't dealt with before. Because, for example, what's happening in the United States right now, you have the
Majority checking out.
uh, to some extent, but what you had was the Democratic Party, which traditionally was aligning with left liberal values and the working class, as they used to say, lower middle class, and then you had the Republican Party, which was for the whatever elites, the people that were well to do, the investors, the Ivy Leagues, and this is actually switching, where now the MAGA Republican Party is saying that they're the party of the working class, and the Democratic Party is really trying to find their way. But of course, they did all these overreaching with the DEI stuff, and I'm a centrist. I mean, I want people to be happy. So, but regardless, the this phenomenon is not new in the United States history. This is actually, if it's a full inversion, like a polar reversal, it would be the seventh time in the United States history where one party was presumably for these ideals, and it just kind of like there's a polar reversal and it
Well,
switches.
it's lost this way, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm not a silver bullet guy with that. I do think less government and more markets is the better way, but there are so many things, and especially as everyone always inches towards their own goals, there are so many cross currents that one needs to deal with. My own personal experience in life shows me that the hardest problem is military, because even if you can have the least government society or whatever, the most ideal amount of government. For some people, that's no government. For some people, it's a little bit of government. For some people, that's a lot of government. But if you can find the somehow you find that perfect balance and everybody's happy, uh, and David Friedman talks about this a lot. There's no guarantee that the society right next to you doesn't all of a sudden turn fascist or dictatorial. And that's what the Canadians are worried about right now, which is unbelievable. It's unbelievable to think about.
There's
So that
a
some military is a hard problem.
there's an interesting phrase by Stalin. He said, "You cannot build a communism in one single country without infecting the change around the entire planet, because
You
otherwise,
can't build. Sorry, say it again. You can't build
you
communism
cannot
in one single country.
you cannot build a communism in one single country without influencing the rest of the world. Otherwise, the world is going to come and destroy you."
Oh, well,
So,
that's the international communist idea. You have to do it in the whole world.
the thing is like surprisingly, Stalin was the one, because many people don't know there was this international something group which was saying that, hey, we're going to use the Soviet Union as a base, and we're going to spread the revolution everywhere. And it's funny that people kind of put this on Stalin, because Stalin was the one who shut them down.
Mm.
So he was like, but he was saying, look, let's build some strong base, and then we're going to use soft power kind of thing, like bringing in people by example. So again, one, well, like, we're talking about the past, but we're also talking about the present. So like Putin, let's take him for example. Instead of building a good base way and building the country with all the oil money he had, with all the natural resources they were selling, with everything else, instead of building a country which would attract people, which would make others want to join that country, want to join that union, he built a very shiny couple of places surrounded by essentially very, very, very horrible excremental bog full of excrement. And then he decided to take, because his country was failing, and it's already shows that it's kind of failing because the war has sped up the failure of Russia, and he took all that and decided to throw it. And yeah, like I said, in the 2020, Ukraine was the one who takes the grunt of all that crap that's coming out of Russia, because a lunatic wants to stay in power.
Yep, that's
So,
true.
you have two ways you say, like, one, I'm pretty confident, like, if we speak about communism, we as a society is going to reach communism. We don't have a choice if we want to develop. But there's two ways of doing it. One is through revolution, which usually used to dictatorship and bloodshed and horrible ideas, and that's usually happens when the people at the top, like, they see that they what was the description of revolutionary situations is when the people at the bottom cannot continue as they were and really need change, and the people at the top don't want to change because they're very, very comfortable or cannot change. And right now we're essentially at the situation where people at the bottom not only what do they want change, but they have actually shown in multiple occasions that the kind of changes they want and how these changes can happen. Or but the people at the top, they don't want to change. So like this Trump's situation, since we were going to talk about that, so let's get to the point of our conversation. But it's the top not wanting to change. It's something we talked to you about last time. It's like the Trump came in, he's the last of the previous generations, and they trying to keep in power no matter what, and they do the craziest stuff.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they bring in the people. So, I mean, you speak Russian, yeah?
No. I mean, I can get
No.
by, but I'm poor at it.
Okay, in the Soviet Union, there was a very oldish movie. I mean, we're talking about 50s, 60s, I guess. And it was like a fairy tale. And the name was Water, Fire, and Brass Horns or Brass Pipes. I don't know how to translate that properly. And the whole idea of that is like for the main character to go and save his girlfriend, obviously, he had to pass few tests. And the test was like fire, water, and then what they called brass pipes, brass horns. So it's like, brass musical instruments.
Hmm.
And the
Brass wind.
third part was obviously fire, water. That's easy, but the brass pipes, I'll just call it like this:
Brass wind. Brass wind.
brass wind,
Wind. Wind.
brass wind. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yep.
Brass wind was the idea that people around he basically ended up in a place where everybody considered him a genius. Everybody talked how great he was, how smart he was. Like he would have like the wisest of the wisest come to him for advice. He was like offered a princess for a bride. It's like, and it really just about managed to get away from there, like through the story. And this is what we're seeing right now. Is like you see, like for example, we glorify certain people, right? And it's as if there's no you are either like essentially God in a human form, or you're a devil in a human form. So it's like this attitude toward Musk right now. Just a few months ago, he was like a brilliant genius who makes all these things possible, and now he's like an evil mastermind who's going to destroy United States of America. And it's like, and same as Trump, he's surrounded by people like they will defend him no matter what, even if there's like they would say, oh, like for example, just recently, there's was it Nissan factory had announced that it will not move part of its production to Mexico because of the trade wars, right? And people will go, oh my God, Trump's actions finally make it like make the manufacturers not move their production to other countries and things like this, like. And if every little success he would have, they would speak about like, and they will blow wind up his ass. Let's be honest. But he's a person out of touch with reality, right? So, and it's very hard to do that. So it's like, I hope I never have to go through that because I probably will fail miserably. So, you know, but like if you look at the situation with Ukraine, right? I mean, remember when we talked, we said that look, Trump is gonna try to make peace, and Putin is gonna fuck him, which is exactly what's
Hmm.
happening right now. The
Yep.
problem Trump has done is like I've done a short video. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's like about 20 minutes when I was talking about the situation. I was like, Trump is trying to achieve claims to trying to achieve good things, but those things is essentially making enemies with people who would be good to help him to achieve those things,
Yep.
right? And he's made trying to make friends with people who really don't want to achieve any of that.
Yep.
So it's like it's a situation with Ukraine. I mean, for me, the point number one in that whole conversation was there's two presidents talking. What the hell does this Vance guy do interfering with the both of them? It's like, sorry, you got two heads of states talking, and then like whether he deserved or not deserved this place, I don't care. But the question is like, okay, you're there to make a picture. Like if you want to say something during the like negotiations or something like this, yes, but in front of all the journalists and things like this, he essentially cuts off Trump and starts having a go at Zelensky. Like I was watching this, is like this is insane. It's
It
like
was very difficult
yes,
to watch. It was very difficult to watch.
but like I said myself, like we want young people in politics, and they will make mistakes. But there's a difference. There's one thing making a mistake, the other thing, which is like essentially breaking every rule there is. Like so that was which another thing which made me like what many people lost in that translation of the whole situation was that Ukrainians was signing that deal with US for the minerals because that would guarantee the US joining the negotiations for peace. So the whole situation was like, oh, Ukrainian president is signing up a deal to allow U.S. companies and U.S. overall to have the first dibs into the mineral market of Ukraine, so that Ukrainians could, so that U.S. would join in the negotiations for peace, which Ukraine has been like asking for a very long time. Because beforehand, U.S. actually, like, despite what people say, U.S. actually stood more bit away from the actual negotiations, right? And now you have Vance, of all people, accusing president of Ukraine of not wanting to make peace.
Yep.
Well, like they said that somebody was like making a comment that Zelensky actually swore under his breath, like he was like, it's like, and I kind of understand the guy. Here's him sitting, like, and talking about how it would be great that we're gonna sign this and U.S. is gonna join this conversation about peace, and finally there's not gonna be any more shooting. And you have some guy who's like, there just because the President Trump allowed him to be there. Let's be honest, picking a fight in front of all the bloody journalists. It's like you go like, oh my god, this is the most retarded situation ever. It's like, and so, but in the end of the day, like obviously, could have Zelensky dealt with it better? I think it's kind of very hard to say because if you're coming in with like certain set of intentions, certain agreements, right, and somebody comes up like you stay talking to some people where you're having a conversation about actually starting, I don't know, doing something together, and then one of them starts punching you in the face out of nowhere. How do you react? Like that, I don't know which politician could like really keep his calm. But the continuance of the situation is that Ukrainians, in the end of the day, well, they kind of won the argument, didn't they?
Well, it
Like,
certainly worked popularity-wise in Zelensky's favor. I mean, he was down in the 50th something percentile. Now he's back up to 70th. So,
I'm not talking about the Zelensky's popularity. I'm talking about the position of Ukrainians. Like Ukrainians came in and they said, okay, yeah, we like they took a pause and they went like, okay, yeah, we want this peace treaty. So if the US, if President Trump wants to be part of it, like, okay, it's like they really took it out of this old American writer Dale Carnegie. If you have you ever read him,
yeah.
How to Make Friends and Influence People?
Hmm.
And they went like, yeah, like, okay, cool. Your little errand boy was a bit of a prick, but we'll let it slide. And they basically said, look, let's start from these particular conditions, right? These are like, we can start from these things. So, for example, Russians don't strike against such targets. We don't strike against such targets. We agree. We start working with this. And what the Russians did, they agreed. They agreed, and just a few hours later, they released a new missile strike against Ukraine.
Yep.
So, from the point of view, so at the moment, the Trump is like sitting there, is like, and this is why there's more talk about Trump starting to actually threaten Russia more and more, because, like, look, guys, you agreed to a deal, and then in this case, I always remember the movie. Do you remember the movie 51st State?
Uh, I do not. Just have the
It's
casualties up here for the viewer.
yeah. There's a moment in there where somebody really kind of stitched someone up, and
Yep.
that character goes, "He fucked me. I'm truly ass invaded," and that's I think how Trump feels. And yeah, yeah. So this is the Russian casualties, but the Russians they did. I mean, not military casualties. They sent missiles against civilians. They blew up a restaurant in Kryvyi Rih. They sent their drones to attack power stations. So yeah, there's like and they broke that treaty that Trump is so proud of. So like
This was the phone
Ukrainians,
call from Putin was here.
yeah,
This is the 30-day average of Russian casualties, which means Russian attacking. It was going down. Zelensky meeting was here,
yeah.
and then it's going back up. This is the 30-day average, and if you look at the actual figures according to the Ukraine MOD, going back up again. So, how longer do you think they can sustain this? I mean, the Russians.
We had this conversation on one of the like forums, and I said, look, the Russians can send 17 million people, 70 million people. They don't care.
Yep.
Like they will pick up every guy they can and send them in. The problem Russians have is the equipment. Right? So it's kind of necessary to cut off the supply of equipment. They don't have much of their own, so they kind of already bringing in like cannons that were built before World War II. Like until they bring artillery pieces which like from before World War II, like or at least the models. It's according to obviously the Russian sources where they show the pictures of things they're using. They are using donkeys. So before
Yep.
they used to do use cars, it's like now they ran out of cars and to deliver anything to the front line. So they're now training donkeys. And it was Michael Naki was the guy just recently. He was like saying talking about this, and he was saying like they bought the donkeys, but they forgot to buy food for the donkeys. So now the volunteers, Russian volunteers who are actually helping Russian army, are having to bring in not drones, not petrol, not anything. They bring food for the donkeys because the donkeys are supposed to carry supplies to the front line, but they can't do this because they can't be fed because they don't have anything to feed them with. So
It's so absurd.
that's the situation. Yes, like many people in the world they don't get it. They think like, oh my god, Russian is like, no, it's not. It's like the level of ridiculousness of the situation, but they can throw people. Remember this, they still have not had, they had only one like where they forced people to join the army. For the last since 22 it was everything else. Most of the people coming in, they were the people who lost. Majority of them had probably some crappy job which was closely tied with big international corporations, like, or at least was financed by them, like like where you have like a big shop somewhere which produces so many jobs, and the money kind of creates some other little jobs, and those guys had these jobs, but now they lost them, and they were like running out of money, and they were the ones joining because the payment just to join up, they were getting paid like 1,000,000 rubles, which is like, what was it, hundreds, about 10,000 euros? No, one. Yeah,
Divided by 100.
yeah.
So, yeah,
So about $10,000,
10,000.
yeah, just to join up at some certain places. So that many people who listen to us, or the few, so that they understood is that $10,000 is something that those guys would not make in, well, if they don't spend anything and they just live on air, many of them would make that maybe in about 4 years.
Yeah, it's important to stress how large that sum is
Yeah,
for
like,
these people that are coming from Siberia.
so to transfer that into, say, for example, if the Germany wanted to hire their soldiers, so the minimum wage is just over, let's say, 2,000 euros. So 24 multiplied by, so yeah, it's about 100. If they start, if they were paying 100 grand just to sign up in Germany, that's about close. Yeah, that's about like, so in US that would be probably close to, in yeah, if they paid US soldiers, no, US citizens about $200,000 just to sign up to go to the war. And that would be close to what the Russians are actually paying their people to sign up.
And they're running out of money, which is a good thing. And paradoxically, the Trump's tariffs are showing that. So you see here, this is Urals. So this comes out of, actually Primorsk is out of St. Petersburg, but it's getting close to 50. This is a very like non-transparent market. I can't pull up better data than you can see here, but it's,
Yeah.
what do you think about this fact that it's going down? And I've been hearing that obviously to keep the state budget afloat, they really need to be back here around 70.
It doesn't matter anything to them. Like the economy is failing not because the oil is going down. Their economy is failing because they don't have any internal production. They can't build their own machines because they've destroyed the engineers. And I was like, the factories they had, they still kind of run on very old machinery, and that is gonna about to run out pretty soon. I mean, something even before like this war, for example, in Donetsk. So it was still Ukraine in some old factories. They were showing that some of the stuff they were building, it was still running on the machines which still had the Nazi insignia on them. So essentially, the machines they all brought all the way back from the Second World War, they were still running across Ukraine and Russia because they're like simple, ragged, and easy-ish to fix. They don't have any advanced production. Some of the news from the Russia coming in, they say, look, why is it that we're giving donkeys to our soldiers while Ukrainians are building drones in numbers that pretty much ahead of an entire planet? I think probably even China now goes like, wait a minute, can we stop supplying like small parts to Ukraine because they're gonna start selling drones across the entire planet as soon as the war is finished, and Ukraine is probably ahead of the entire planet on that front. They just have that much experience. Like, what was it in Kherson, in my home city? They say that the drones essentially being built in the city and go straight to the front line. So it's not like one factory somewhere far behind. It's like multiple little places which build drones, and the drones go straight to the front line.
How is Ukraine going to manage the lack of support from the U.S.? Because the U.S. is clearly, we're either moving into a trilateral world where you have the baddies, which are obviously Russia, Iran, North Korea, and then China's like basically in there. You have Europe, the global South is staying out of it, and then you have the United States. So they're either United States is either going to pull separately away, which is trying to do now, or it might even join the China side because Trump wants 19th century politics. Here's look at this one. This is actually I got to zoom this out a little bit. There's no way that Europe, with its fragmented forces and no single command chain, in my opinion, can keep up with what Russia's doing. And certainly Russia, Europe needs Ukraine to stop Russia before they start coming into the Baltics or Poland. Poland is a very strong, capable army that has a lot of tech, but nobody knows how to fight like the Ukrainians know how to fight right now. How do you think it's going to shape out? I mean, there's not enough support at this moment, in my opinion, for not even for the Baltics, but Ukraine is losing the eye and the heart of the American government. Maybe not the American people, but certainly the American government. Hold on, Yuri. You're muted. You're muted. Mute button at the bottom. Whoops. Looks like he dropped out, but I'm sure he will come right back. It's a full Ukraine update today, everybody. We'll get back to more Bitcoin tomorrow. Still the best asset to protect yourself and your family amongst the madness and the chaos. This is the hardest thing that I see. Where a lot of the right-wing commentators in the U.S. who are somehow showing affinity for tyrannical Russia, but then they say, well, Russia's not going to invade and they're not going to do anything more because they can't even take more than 20% of Ukraine. That's true, but look how big Ukraine's army is stopping them. And then look how fragmented and, as it says, undersized the European army is. The thing is, every one of these countries has a different command chain. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, have the largest, well, I wouldn't say the largest, but the most smooth integration with NATO from the beginning. That's been, that's been in the cards that we need to be NATO ready. Here comes Yuri back in.
Yeah, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, because it's a wide. This one is a wired mic, and the wire just disconnected for some reason, and then it crashed the whole system.
No problem. We can hear you again. No problem. But yeah, what do you think about? I was just talking about the situation here. Very fragmented for Europe, and Ukraine is basically keeping the enemy at the gates. What do you think about this?
Well, the thing is like again, but something we talked to you about last time is like many people when they hear that the Russia have captured like this village and this village and this village, what they forget is that like the entire territory that the Russia captured, like ever since they got kicked back in 2022, end of 2022, like 20, a bit in 2023, was that the entire territory that they have recaptured is about the size of Berlin,
Yeah.
about the size of the city of Berlin. So yes, we hear, oh, they captured this little village and this. So we hear lots of names of the villages that they caught, but in reality, the movement of the Russians is not really that great. And you already have shown that they've lost official. These are the official numbers. This is not true numbers. This is the officially that some we could confirm through any means, like available to, like around 1 million people.
1 million.
Uh,
I've heard there've been 100,000 dead identified, but you mean 1 million from Ukraine side? That was the number I was
no, no,
showing here.
from the Russian side, I think you're
Yeah,
showing.
yeah. This is
Yeah, so
I gotta let me put this on full so people can see it. It's 927,000 according to Ukraine.
yeah, Russian. Yeah, so it's like nearly 1 million people, like, and this is confirmed.
But this includes POWs. It includes injured.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
And
saying. But this is just the confirmed losses,
yeah,
right? So they already lost 1 million people, million military
but
trained people,
they
as
could. I
well
mean,
as
they could lose 1 million more. They're ready to build up this army
they
to two
can,
million.
but they also lost most of their tech, most of their tanks, most of their artillery, like more or less modern artillery. Yes, they have some yet, but they're getting less and less and less. And one of the things is that Ukrainians just last few days, I think, there was news that Ukrainians have managed to take out uh, the air defense, two or three air defense systems, which are very hard to replace.
Yeah,
Like
I saw that.
Ukraine, one thing Ukrainians have managed to do well, much better than Russians did, is to keep their tech. Because Ukrainians fought essentially very clever defensive war, trying to keep the casualties to the minimum, trying to keep the almost like the attack in on Russia. The first attack into Russia, I think, was more of a fluke. The success they had there than the plan. Right, so the one they had last year. You remember where they sent in like a few hundred people, and what happened? Then they stopped for like 2 or 3 days because they probably could not believe that 2 or 300 people could just capture that much territory because there was nobody on the border. But there's something like, again, over a year ago now, I was making a video and I was saying, like, look, guys, the problem Ukraine has that Russia does not is that Ukraine has to keep way more military. And a lot of that military has to be, for example, on the border of Russia and Ukraine. And because the Ukrainians are not allowed to go into Russia, right, they would not be, they have to keep the troops on the border, whilst the Russia has an ability to leave the border essentially empty. So they can take all the like active troops that are capable of military
Right.
operations, and they can drop them to a very few specific points. So Ukraine making incursions into Russia and how easy it was both times. So they just got they essentially left Kursk and straight away they go to what's the second? Okay, let me just check.
Belgorod.
Belgrade, right? So they essentially just get out of Kursk and then they go straight into Belgorod and then they go somewhere. They will go somewhere else. And the ease with which they actually cross the border Like it's something I was talking about. There's no troops on the border, so Ukrainians. There's like one thing is if you try to still like really have a little bit just to try and capture small units. But if you have a couple of tanks and more than 20 people, there's nobody there to stop you.
Right.
And this goes so whereas Ukrainians were forced to keep more powerful border guard across the entire place because they never knew when Russians are going to come in and from which directions. They did not have that. The Russians don't have that ban. It was like, well, we will not go into Ukraine from, I don't know, Kursk again, or we will not attack Kharkiv unless we come into it from Donbass. So Ukrainians were forced to do that. Now that Ukrainians have started making incursions into Russia, when they essentially said, okay, look, guys, we love you all very much, but we have to do that. Like the attack in Kursk, right? It was aimed to draw away Russian troops from the front, but I think even Ukrainian command did not have the idea that this was going to happen, what has happened over there. I don't think like obviously late over time over like over a couple of weeks they filled up, they sent more troops there, but the original attack it was like a few hundred people, and then they stopped for like 3 days. They didn't go anywhere because I strongly suspect they did not have the manpower in there to capture any more territories. People like and then you see that they stood there, and then after like 3 days it was also like very unplanned because like for example in the video I was making I was saying like look, if Ukrainians have gathered like 10 to 20,000 troops and went into Russia and essentially instead of like trying to capture territory just took their time destroying the bridges, destroying the railways, taking out all the kind of military infrastructure that could be used to invade Ukraine, not only will they draw the forces away from the front in Ukraine, but it was very likely if they actually had like certain points that they certain targets they had to hit, they could probably reach Moscow before Russians even reacted.
Let me just show this really quick. This I've shown this before, but this is at the beginning. They had a smaller part of Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. It's like 7% of the total Ukraine. This got up to nearly 30%, 27, 28%. And then from there, it's been downhill for the Russians. So it's more or less something like this, which is something like 18% of Ukraine. Um, and then you put on the casualties that Russia sustained, that 900,000 number, and it just grows for them. I mean, this is per square kilometer. So it started nothing, and then it's obviously grown, and it will keep growing for them. Uh,
Yeah,
and it's clearly an unsustainable number. You know, back in January only, it was 7 soldiers per square kilometer that they've taken. Now it's 8. You're losing an additional soldier every quarter per square
yeah.
kilometer. But this is what
And
they're
this
doing, man.
and the thing is like again in one of my videos, I even had somebody try to argue with me on that point. I said that if the front stops, if the Russians actually try to simply hold the defense line, so I actually got the map open in front of me, and if they said, "Look, we have captured everything we want. We have this road to Crimea, right? So we're not gonna advance anymore. We're gonna just try to dig in and just hold the lines." Even if they try to do that, they cannot. because obviously, unless they have like an agreement that Ukrainians are not going to attack the positions, the length of position is so great, and the means by which Ukrainians attack us have changed so much that they cannot simply hold the positions. They have to attack. They have to keep the lines moving. Otherwise, Ukrainians will be able to build up their defenses and walk from the defenses and slowly, like, throwing drones at Russians and doing all those things, they will take them out. And the difference is that the Russian soldiers, they want to go home. Ukrainian soldiers, they have a very clear idea what they're fighting for. That's like unmistakable. And then they will take it slowly. It's like I said, it's these little differences in the way that people walk. Like, they end up creating this situation where it's like Russians is dictatorship from the top down. Ukrainians, at the moment, they're kind of in a balance. So there is obviously like command and control, but also there is a lot of initiative from the bottom up, and that initiative is heard sooner or later. And this what happens is like, where this is why Ukrainians were so much faster to implement drones, and they're so much better at implementing drones, because it's not like in Russia where they go like, okay, you want drones, we're gonna give you that particular drone. No, it's like it's always try and test new things, and it's always the feedback from the bottom up. This is why Ukrainians have changed certain field tactics and things like this, whereas the Russians still go through the same field tactics. Well, they maybe added a bit of drones on top of those, but it's still the same tactics. Ukrainians have changed. And Russians, they cannot hold this defense line, because even if they hold the defense line, the losses they're going to take on that defense line, it's going to be there. It's not, they don't care about people, but they care about tanks. They care about air defense systems. Like they don't produce them in enough quantities. They almost lost all the, how to put, human capital, which allows to produce those high level air defense systems in high quantities. They don't have the equipment to produce those air defense systems in high quantities. They don't have the factories that can produce the parts for those systems anymore. Because over the last, well, ever since the fall of Soviet Union, right? First they were just selling them because, but then even when Putin centralized the power, because he had a very good run with high oil prices, he was the one who was like saying, well, we don't need that very much. That was like really just many of the projects they had. For example, they tried building their processor, and that failed miserably. They built their phone, but somehow it was built in China with Chinese parts. They just, all it had was just a Russian language operating system on there, which was written in China. But lots of Russian businesses have received the money that was apparently used to build that phone. And obviously, many people in the West, they don't know that, but the Russian speakers, this is why I'm saying is like they have not created the country which people would want to join. They have not created a system where people would go like, it's not perfect, but we're like, but this looks better than everything around us. They like, compared to the West, was like, people want to join the Europe because Europe has lots of good traits that people went over there, they went to Europe, and then they brought them to Ukraine. And actually, at the moment, like we mentioned last time, it's like some of those systems work in Ukraine better than they do in Europe. But the difference is that they walk in Ukraine and the Europeans go like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's improve ourselves. Let's make the systems work for us. And there's a drive up. So there's a drive to improve. Whereas the Russians, they just say like, they would say, oh, this is a nice system. We're going to take so much money from the government, and then they produce nothing. And the best case scenario, they just buy a system which has been produced by someone else.
Here's the currencies. Up is bad here, so it's
Yeah,
dollar ruble since the beginning, and Putin came in here, by the way. So it's been nothing but bad news for him versus other currencies. 3,000% loss against the dollar. That's 30 times. Uh,
and
the
if you
euro's
think,
36% loss since 1980. The Swiss franc is a 47% gain. Down is good here if you're in that country. But yeah, I mean, they're just going to keep it on it, Yuri. They're going to keep on it.
but the thing is like how long can you last? Like not only is he losing equipment, but now he's losing the people that want to join. So he's running out of people. So he's gonna have to start forcing people to join the military. They already do that through young recruits because they do have like the army where you have to go to serve when you're like 18, 19. And there's already plenty of stories where it's like, I mean, okay, we're gonna use Michael Naki again. He's makes program videos in Russian. Just recently, he was showing that like some soldier is made a video and posted it, and he said, "Look, if I signed that contract, like, this is because I was beaten. I don't want to sign this contract, and the only way I would have signed this is if I break under pressure. No way I'm signing that thing voluntarily." And I believe he's been made to sign the contract.
Hmm.
So he said, so there's been a pressure where he was beaten, like, physical, mental pressure, which they made him to sign a contract. So this now works. But sooner or later, they are going to have to start like forcing people, calling people into the military. And what happens then? I mean, first time around, when they've done that, they have lost over 1 million people who simply left Russia. What
Do you
happens
think
now?
that they're going to? Uh, I mean, you yourself just said that he can't stop. Um, so do you think that they're going to try to open up another front, either another front in Ukraine from Belarus, or try to invade, the Suwalki Gap?
I don't think they have the power. They don't have the manpower. What they're looking for is like from the very beginning. I was saying that, look, if the Europe and US have came into Ukraine or was very actively like supporting Ukraine, just a second. Okay, if they were doing that, right, the Russians would have said, look, they would have had an excuse to leave. So what we're looking at is like when they was before they started the war, I've basically saying, and I described that in the first video I made about this war, and I said, look, they were looking to come in and then have a very quick reaction from the West, and then fall back, but then they would have an excuse to say, look, the border is against us, they're trying to get us, so we have to unite around the leader. And the story is repeating itself from every time. So the way why this is this Putin's war, it's not anybody else's. Is remember the second Chechnya war. The Yeltsin makes him the prime minister, and he says, this is the next guy after me. As soon as Putin goes into power, they start a second Chechen war. Like many people in the West don't know, but the Chechnya has been leveled to the ground. The biggest city, Grozny, had to be rebuilt from scratch. There was not a single building left there. And the losses were humongous. The Russian losses, the Russian soldier losses were humongous, right? But what many people still don't know is the fact that the Chechens, because they were forced to remain in Russia, over time, many soldiers who were volunteering to go into Chechnya, because many of them have committed crimes against humanity, Chechens have actually slowly tracked them down, and not everyone, but many of the soldiers that went into Second World War, Second Chechen War, sorry, and the ones who have committed many atrocities, like so not every soldier. Obviously, there's a lot of Russian guys who go to defend their country, or even if they fight for money, they fight. They're clean, good soldiers. Nobody can say anything against the everyday guy who goes there and fights there, But the ones who did, Chechens managed to track them down, and many of those guys are now either in jail or somehow died. They've been killed. And the way the Chechens track them down is by using the Russian police. So that's what many people don't know about. This is the internal Russian things, which many people in the West don't know. All right, so this is the Second Chechen War. 2004, he has a gas war with Ukraine. We already talked about this, right? And that was like, this is when they started going on about like, well, you can do, if you don't select Putin or whoever he says to elect, we're gonna have the same issues they have in Ukraine. Then he has 2008. They have Olympics, and they spend humongous amount of money to bring Winter Olympics into subtropical climate, and people start complaining, and some people had some, like some serious rumbling was starting in Russia, even during the Olympics. And all of a sudden, during that very Olympics, which is not officially is not supposed to be time to start wars, during
You
those
mean
very
Sochi
Olympics, mm,
or
yeah, Sochi Olympics, yeah.
20? That's 2014
No, this
in
went
Russia.
2008, I think.
No, that was, Beijing was in 2008. Beijing.
Was it 2015?
It was it was in
No, no,
Russia.
no,
It
no.
was during.
Sochi Olympics, and it was 2008 because that's when they invaded Georgia.
Mm, no, Beijing Olympics were 2008. I know that. So Usain Bolt won and everything. I'll look it up really.
Okay, cool. Let me just check quickly. Yeah.
It's 2014 Sochi. That was Maidan. I remember because that was like the first time that the Olympics got completely schooled, and particularly the Russians got completely schooled by Twitter because that was such an embarrassing production. Like the most expensive Olympics ever produced, $50 billion, something like this. Of course, it was all going to the elites and overinflated contracts, and they were they were painting the grass green. They were
Yes.
painting the grass green, and
Oh, such a.
uh, the toilets weren't working. The doors were getting locked. One of these
Yeah,
bobsledders
yeah.
had to break through a wall to get out of the toilet because the toilet just the door there wouldn't work. And there was that hashtag, which is still the funniest hashtag if you just search for it on Twitter, unless Musk censored it. It's called Sochi problems, and yeah, I mean this is Russian style.
I'm just trying to remember what happened in 2008, but it's like Something happened in 2008 essentially, but
There was a there was a well Georgia happened in 2008.
yes, but the Georgia didn't happen. Georgia happened after something that happened in Russia. So essentially, Georgia happened because people in Russia started complaining about something,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they find a reason to fight a war with Georgia.
Yeah.
As like you have to unite around Putin. But something was there was other a but yeah, but something so there was something happening from the economics point of view. It's like the whole crisis thing. But basically, Georgia happens when this problems start in Russia. Then obviously, the war with Ukraine somehow starts in 2014, like against the revolution. But obviously, against the revolution, they were fighting because the Russians could see the alternatives. And now they obviously were saying like, hey, wait a minute, like if you like, this is why there's like a lot of problems were started in Ukraine by Russians, and there was like interesting one in 2014. Was already summer 2014. There was a case in the Odessa when the Russians there was like a big issue, the big thing that happened in Odessa where people were protesting against Russian invasion, but also there was like some pro-Russian people that protesting there. And as was at that time, I was in touch with a few people who lived in Odessa, and they were saying like before that happened, they were saying there's a lot of people here who do not who sound the, is a perebrika. It's from behind perebrik is the way they call a certain part of the pavement in St. Petersburg, I believe. And
Okay.
at the time, these people were like, if somebody was coming with that accent, they were saying these are the people from the Zaporebrikov, so from that area. So I was like, and they're saying like, look, there's a lot of these guys here. Like, what the fuck are they doing in Odessa? Like, and then obviously that thing happened. Odessa summer 2014, but there was like, but they were essentially creating this kind of situation in Ukraine where they could say to the Russians, hey, look, if you start protesting like Ukrainians did, what you will get is what's happening in Ukraine. And from that on, these Ukrainians were increasingly becoming the Nazis. From them on, like, we obviously talked to you about this last time around. Like, from them on, like, this very much propaganda going on about how horrible Ukrainians and how great it is that they're fighting a war with Ukraine. Next, there was war in Syria, and again they get involved in that and look how great we are. I remember where there's videos of Russians trying to ram American convoys, and like they were showing, look how great we are and how Americans are not don't want to ram into us. it's like it's like you're an idiot trying to cause a crash of two, like the you know heavy vehicles that are going at high speed on a road which is essentially just a path. It's not even a road, like it's not even like asphalt or anything. It's just like a dirt path which is like a little bit above the rest of the ground. And they were trying, like they were trying to drive into Americans. It's like and they were showing how great they are. And I remember where they've sent their aircraft carrier. And it's like a nuclear aircraft carrier, but and then it was when it was passing past England, all of a sudden a lot of smoke started coming out of it. Like, and I was saying a joke that the people in England started rowing just to get away from it because they didn't know if it's gonna blow up or anything. Like, it was like, oh my god! It turned out that they basically crashed the actual reactor. It has died. I was running on
Incredible.
like a very, very, very old diesel engine with
It's
very,
absolutely
very,
incredible.
very bad diesel fuel, which basically meant that it was throwing so much smoke out there that Europe wanted to move somewhere else. Like a nuclear disaster just going past you on the ocean is like not
Yeah.
something anybody wanted. Right? It's like
What one question, Yuri? Why do you think that through all these wars that they've started, why do you think that their behavior is much less professional than Western militaries? And again, I always get the whataboutism about Americans going to Iraq. We're not talking about that right now, and I never supported that anyway. But um, if you have this culture in the Russian army, which is basically like a raping and pillaging culture. It happened after World War II. There was some 2 million German women that were probably raped by Russians, and we saw what happened in Bucha and Irpin, and they just have this culture that's not at all uh, becoming of any. I mean, war is hell for sure, but it's a very brutal culture. Why do you think that is?
because if you have no power during the like that's what we mentioned just a few minutes ago or something I said is like Western militaries, like there's an everyday soldier, despite a chain of command or anything else like this, the Western soldier feels himself empowered, right? Whether it's used through training, whether it's through good wages, whether it's through being like at least while serving, like Western soldiers, they feel themselves empowered. Like I was admittedly like it's not something I was looking for, but I actually listened to a conversation of two ladies, and they were Russian speakers in Germany, and they were saying like one of their grandsons, they lived in Germany for a long time, and their grandson decided to join German military because in Germany you have like a service where you're not really a soldier, but you have to go through a service. They teach you some basic skills, something like this. And he when he came back from this service, he said like, look, I never thought about it. He never considered that. But once he tried that service, he felt like, yeah, it was a very good option to join. Like in US, for example, if you take US soldiers, does the government slightly abuse that service? Yes, but nevertheless, for many soldiers, the service in the military is a good way to rise up in life. Like, they get the training, they get the education. If they served for a long time, they get this pension, so they have their basics. Yes, the U.S. society overall fails many of those guys when they come out of military, but at least while they are in the military, they feel empowered. I walked in an American base in Stuttgart. I spoke to the guys who, not everybody, but the guys who worked there. I spoke to their wives, it's like, so, and you feel that confidence in them. Like, there's something like they feel like, yeah, we confident about our future. Like, in Russia, it's very different. Like, especially amongst soldiers. Like,
Why
if
is it different
you
though? Before you say it, why is it different? Do you think?
because abuse starts from the very beginning. So the stories of the soldiers being beaten up in the service, like the meat tax in Ukraine, it's like beforehand, like the videos were coming out how the officers or like some, so for example, if served for a longer time, they would abuse the lower ranked soldiers, like, making them do horrible things, rapes, beating people up, taking their food, taking their clothes. That's normal, right? And in the Soviet Union as well, like many people were brought there, like from the poorest, most like how the deprived regions of Russia, right? And for example, during the Second World War, like many Soviet soldiers that were coming into Germany, and they would be growing up on the farms on like somewhere in the countryside in Soviet Union, and then he comes to a German farm, and they have electricity even in the like everywhere on the farm, whereas the only first time this guy saw electricity is when he hit a big city, and that was like when he got recruited into the army. He didn't even have that opportunity. So that was like, and the Soviet army is like, was, they fought with that. So, for example, if you take times of Afghanistan, the soldiers, there was a lot of push to stop that kind of behavior. But once the Soviet Union has failed, that came back into Russian army. So in Ukrainian army, it was for a little while, but it changed, right? So over the years, because Ukrainian army, first it kind of became a bit more professional. Secondly, for many guys in Ukraine as well, so it's like they would they felt like they could go to the army. They knew why they were going there. Like, for example, to get a free driver's license for the car and for the truck. So this would allow them more better jobs. It's like when they come back home. Two, like unlike in the Russian army, in Ukrainian army, you did not serve like across the country. So in Ukrainian army, like if I were, to example, if I stayed in Ukraine, right, and I joined the army, for me, I would have gone to one of the top army universities in Ukraine at the time. I was already accepted. But if I did not, if I simply went into the army, I would serve in my home city, and I would not even stay in the barracks. So I would be expected to turn up at 8 o'clock in the morning, do my day, do my duties, and then at like 7 o'clock in the evening, I would go home. Right. So that really changed. So the soldiers felt more empowered. So it's like, despite the fact that the Ukrainian army was not the most respected part of the Ukrainian society for a very long time, the actual army has changed. The Russian soldiers, they get sent miles away. They like, once you go into the army, you spent a year never even seeing anybody, So essentially your unit, and like I said, this is the unit where people would beat you up, abuse you, and once you're in your second year of service, that's what you would do to the people who just came in, right? And then this goes up. So some of these people become professional soldiers. They go to become officers, and this is why we hear so like those people who speak Russians. They hear so much about Russian soldiers saying, "Hey, our officers are treating us like cattle," and these officers become generals. Right? So that's the difference. Like in the West, the soldiers feel respected, and as they the build their career, that respect goes up with them. That does not happen in Russia.
No, it doesn't. And it's amazing to me that, I mean, there's many things that flabbergast me about this year. Obviously, I knew that Trump was going to be friendly, at least to some extent, to Putin. But the fact that no one's acknowledging this, no one's acknowledging the brutality of their military, and I mean, the U.S. isn't even acknowledging the invasion, which is incredible at the moment. But uh, from the Russian side, it's such an appalling way to live your life in every level. But the fact that these people just get sent on these meat waves, they come back in saran wrap, and they're running out of body bags to have cleaned. I mean, they're running out of body bags. They have to clean and take old body bags. It's just so terrible and such a tragedy for humanity. Is there ever going to be, you know, a group of mothers rising up and trying to put an end to this, or are they just too afraid for their own lives?
At the moment, what many people don't understand is many people who go to war in Ukraine, they're volunteers. They go there for the money. Right? So, for example, in the second Chechen war, the mothers did rise up because many soldiers that were there, they were not volunteers, they were conscripts, and they were made to go there. So the mothers did rise up. So far, since like I said, the end of 2022, right? The people who were going there, they were volunteers. So they went out. They because they lost their jobs or because they were drunks or something like this, alcoholics, they couldn't get proper jobs, and all of a sudden they saw a windfall in the form of that huge amount of money. They went out and signed up. So at the moment, yes, they're being treated like shit. Yes, this all is happening, but majority of them are volunteers, like, and many Russians simply don't care about them. So there's plenty of stories already coming out that where these guys who got bought by this, oh, you're gonna get so much money, which many of them don't actually get the money, even if they survive. And then they've been told that, oh, you're gonna be the next elite. So they get bought into that idea that they were gonna be like heroes when they come back home. And when they come back home, because there's a video I watched where the guy lost a leg or something like this, so he couldn't fight anymore, and he was like, "Hey, I cannot get an artificial limb, like nothing to replace my leg." So essentially, he's walking on this like an old pirate with a stick coming out of his leg, because the line to get something like this is like 10 years long, and he's very like he hasn't received his money, and some mentioned something like this in a conversation to his neighbors who were like complaining about him not doing something right, and they said to him, dude, we did not send you there, you signed the contract yourself, you're the idiot. It's like, and he's not really a hero back home. I remember when something we talked about last time I was saying, like, look, at the moment, there's not that many of them coming back. But once these guys go back home, like all the people who went through that military, like, once they get out of the hospitals, and that huge amount of, like, people who went through battles come back home, that's when the worst part of the Russian fall is going to start. And at the moment, like I say, they kill more people, get killed, they end up in the hospitals, and from the hospitals they go back straight back into battle. As many people, like I say, well, many people who are not reported as dead or wounded or captured. So the amount of people that are missing in action is humongous as well. There's videos by Russian soldiers where they were showing some road which they had to take, and they finally captured that, and they were saying, look, here's we go into our new position, and the whole road is covered in, like, blown up cars, tanks, APC, people carriers, like all of those things. And he says, look, if you look into any of them, you can see bodies still lying there. And because, like, they have a new position, but there's still drones flying about. And they say, look, they obviously they make video, but they also look around for the drones. And they say, we cannot really take these bodies out. So there's like dozens, if not hundreds of bodies, which will never be picked up. Or if they will be picked up, it's not going to happen anytime soon. So those losses, many people don't include them, but if we can include those losses, then we'll probably see that they have lost more than a million, way more than a million people, and way more people dead than we can imagine. And once those people go back home, that's when the whole storm starts.
It's so much more of a dangerous time, though. I mean, how much longer? I know you're not Nostradamus, but it's over 1,000 days. I mean, well over 1,000 days, over 3 full years, um, million casualties.
Like I said, they cannot stop attacking, so they will. This is why they cannot sign any sort of peace treaty with, not even like ceasefire with Ukraine, because 5 to 10 days of no shooting, and the whole thing starts disintegrating. And
Right.
I'm not being a Nostradamus, right? It's like I'm not predicting anything because oh my God, Yuri is so clever. It's happened before. It's literally happened before. Uh, this is how the Russian Empire fell apart. So what happened was during the First World War, right, when they're fighting with the Germans, the soldiers were sent there, like, but they didn't really want to be there. They didn't want to fight the Germans. So, and basically, what the Germans did is they said, "Look, we're not going to fight you. We're not going to attack you." Right? They reached a certain line, and so the Russian lines, they essentially disintegrated. The Russian soldiers have literally left they stopped fighting, they just went home. And this is what turned this whole revolution thing into the mess that it became. Oops, sorry.
Well, let's hope that it happens again. I'm not holding my breath, but I don't know how much longer it can be. Listen, Yuri, we're gonna have to wind it down. Getting close to 2 hours today.
Yeah, so
We can't do the 4 hours that we did last time.
what we were saying last time is like, yeah, we spoke, so we need to wind it down.
Yeah, we
But
got to wind it down in 5 minutes, not an hour.
yeah,
But
but
I mean, listen,
so
what do you want to leave us with? Where are we going?
right now, I'd say we have to. Number one is like, keep it cool. Obviously, we see that the whatever Trump says, he's essentially he's further and further putting himself into a trap that he himself has created. You know,
Putin has probably
oh,
influenced that trap too.
pardon?
Putin has also influenced that trap.
Well, Trump was the one who's beating the drums about let's sign a peace treaty, and now
Yeah.
that the peace, Ukrainians have come up and said, "Hey, we're ready," and the Russians are not ready. So we shall see how long Trump actually lasts out before he has to really admit that him trying to be nice to and well running to a nutcase, who's only cares about keeping himself in the power. We shall have to see, and then what Trump does, whether he just capitulates like a little biatch, or whether he finds finally himself, like somebody supplies him with a bit of Viagra mixed with cocaine, and he remembers that he's still a man and not an orange ball playing golf. You know. So I would say one of the things we didn't talk about, but obviously we mentioned Elon Musk today. It's like, and people love to criticize him for apparently updating American computer systems, which have not been updated since 1960s. Like, and I was like, something which really ticked me off about that is when they were these people writing, oh my god, this 20 some 24-year-olds like fixing something, like what a stupid idea, why can't we have those professionals which have been there for years and have never bothered updating the systems to the modern standards. I'd like to ask people a question, which is like, if the society, if we have created a society where the 24-year-olds apparently so stupid we can't trust them anything, does it say anything about the 24-year-olds or about us as a society? Let's just slow down and think about it. Maybe let's see if, let's trust into our 24-year-olds. They're trying their best and probably need our support more than we need, way more than we imagine, right? And with the economics, I know we touched on that, and but I would suggest, I would hope that instead of fighting amongst the governments, and putting in actual tariffs or whatever, let's concentrate on the people who actually break the system. Let's, instead of creating tariffs, let's do what actually Americans did. There's a story from the Gulf of Mexico where the oil companies, they started bringing Mexicans because they could pay them less. And what the American employees did, the engineers, the people, they said, we are not going to come onto these. So this is actually something to what we talked in the beginning, where the communism, whether it works or not. The people who worked on these oil rigs, they went on strike and they said, you can bring anybody you want as long as you pay them same as you would pay an American employee. We're happy to have Mexicans, anybody, but you cannot bring the slaves. They have to be paid as much as we are. So this is one of the reasons I say that communism is going to happen, because we as a human beings ultimately, as a majority, want to take care about people about us and not just make as much money as we can.
All right. Well, I don't usually end it on these communist notes, but if communism requires democracy and free markets
Yeah,
in your world, then
yes,
I'm fine with that definition.
yes. If people like, I'm happy to sit down and have a chat. Maybe a little bit later, not today, but we're happy. I would say I have a very communist solution to our current market problems, which could be done only through cooperation of the governments and people with each other, and only by us as a majority taking decisions which take care about everybody around us. And we can go through those decisions. I'm happy to have anybody question my solutions. I would like to offer.
Good.
Right. So, and just to end, again, we started from this in the beginning, is, guys, somebody is like, I talked with, we basically design, there's a design for an energy storage slash production solution, and we are looking for investors. So again, just to make it available, to make it go big, and
Do you have
hopefully
any
get,
website info?
not at the moment, because like I said, it's we just spoke yesterday, so we got details of each other. We got in touch. We spoke yesterday, so now we have to sit down and actually work out the next steps because we don't want to be. So this is where we started talking about communism as well. Like we don't want to be the guys who just come up with this big great idea, run around like crazy, they get given lots of money, and then the whole thing goes into nowhere. We are actually both coming back from the backgrounds where we want to make it succeed. So we have to sit down, think about our next steps. If people are interested to join in early to influence those steps, we'll be happy to join forces with people from anywhere. And then we believe it could severely drop, obviously, help us drop the price of oil for Russia, which would be good. But it would also bring electricity and it make green electricity to not just Europe and US, but also going to be able, the cost of the cost of these systems is so low that we believe we could pretty much Im, impose it and provide it to much of the so-called third world countries. So to make it viable, so instead of them burning coal, oil, and gas, or they could actually build their backbone of the electricity network already with new technologies.
Okay, Yuri. Is your
So
contact info on your YouTube channel? Do you want to put that in the comments? Just post it. Post your username in the comments so
if
people
they
can
look for
find it.
my name, this is why I put the full name, Yuri
Mm-hmm.
Semyhin. I think I'm the only one on YouTube, so
Okay,
at least,
so it's the
at
same.
least,
It's the
at
same
least the
YouTube
only,
username.
at least the only one who reminds Shrek.
I like the
So
self-deprecation. That's my humor as well. So
I look like
much better than
Shrek.
Shrek, my
So
friend.
I'm his twin cousin.
All right, Yuri. Well, thank you for chatting
All right, guys.
today. It's interesting for me, and I hope for our viewers to get a little bit more flavor on the Soviet Union and background on Russia and why things are happening the way they are in Ukraine. So, thank you for providing some commentary there, and Slava Ukraine.
Heroim Slava. But thanks for giving me an opportunity. And like I said, we can probably speak if you want. We could, I don't know, make it more conversations like this because me as a YouTuber, I'm not very good because often speaking to just a camera, I'm just trail off on weird angles. But having a conversation with somebody is cool. And if people are willing to drop us a challenge, then we could probably bring more people in and have that conversation. I mean, markets, solutions, everything else. We're in a wonderful time when our generation finally gets the power. You
Yep,
know,
that's for sure. That's for sure.
so we can as well talk about how which direction we want to direct, in which
Yeah,
direction we want to go with it.
I agree. All right, Yuri. Thank
Cool.
you for chatting.
Thanks.
Have a good
Thanks.
day. Talk to you
You
soon.
too, and